The courtroom fell silent as the young boy, just 12 years old, stepped forward. His small frame seemed even tinier against the towering wooden podium. The air was thick with tension as everyone waited to hear what he would say. Nobody expected that two simple words from this child would change not only his life but also shake the very foundation of their small town's justice system. It was a sunny Tuesday morning in April when the boy arrived at the courthouse with his grandmother. She held his hand tightly, her weathered fingers intertwined with his smaller ones. Her eyes, though tired from countless sleepless nights, held a fierce determination. She had raised him since he was 3, working 2 jobs to make ends meet after his parents were gone. The case seemed straightforward at first. The boy had been accused of stealing from the local convenience store. Security footage showed someone of his height and build, wearing a similar red hoodie, taking items off the shelves. The store owner, who had always been kind to the neighborhood kids, was devastated to press charges, but the police insisted it was necessary to teach these kids a lesson. What nobody knew was that the boy had been at the public library that entire afternoon, working on his science project. He was too scared to speak up when first questioned by the police. His grandmother, however, never doubted his innocence for a second. She had taught him better than that, raised him with values that ran deeper than any temptation could reach. The court-appointed attorney seemed disinterested, barely looking up from his phone during their brief meetings. The boy's grandmother had tried to hire a private lawyer, but on her salary as a hospital cafeteria worker and part-time cleaner, it was impossible. Still, she refused to give up. Every evening, after her double shifts, she would sit with her grandson, telling him to trust in the truth. The case had attracted attention in their community. Some neighbors whispered behind closed doors, already convinced of his guilt. Others, who had watched him grow up, helping elderly Mrs. Thompson with her groceries and teaching younger kids to ride their bikes, stood firmly in his corner. The local youth center director even offered to testify about the boy's character, about how he spent hours tutoring younger children in math. As the boy stood before Judge Reynolds, the courtroom was packed. His homeroom teacher sat in the back, clutching a folder full of his perfect attendance certificates and honor roll reports. His grandmother's co-workers had taken the day off to show support, filling an entire row of seats. Even Mrs. Thompson, despite her arthritis, had made it to court with her walker. The judge, known for his strict demeanor, looked down at the boy over his reading glasses. Years of experience had taught him to read people, to see beyond the surface. Something about this case had bothered him from the start. The boy's clean record, his academic achievements, the community's support, it didn't fit the profile of a troubled youth. When he asked the boy if he had anything to say in his defense, nobody expected what happened next. The boy looked up, his eyes clear and unwavering. In a voice that started soft but grew stronger with each word, he said just 2 words that would change everything. The impact of those words, and what happened next, would become a story passed down through generations in their town, a testament to the power of truth and the importance of looking beyond appearances. The story was far from over. As those 2 words hung in the air, they would set in motion a chain of events that would expose hidden truths, challenge deep-seated prejudices, and remind an entire community about the real meaning of justice. It would become a tale not just about a boy's innocence, but about the strength of a grandmother's love, the power of community support, and the importance of standing up for what's right, even when it seems the whole world is against you. This was just the beginning of a journey that would touch hearts, change minds, and prove that sometimes the smallest voices can make the biggest impact. The real question wasn't just about what happened that day in the convenience store, it was about how a community would choose to treat its youngest members, and whether truth and justice would prevail over assumptions and prejudice. As tension gripped the courtroom, memories of the past few weeks flooded through the boy's mind. He remembered the day the police officers had shown up at his school, pulling him out of his favorite science class. The embarrassment of walking past his classmates, their eyes following him as he was led down the hallway, still burned in his chest. His grandmother had rushed to the school immediately after getting the call, leaving her shift at the hospital without even changing out of her cafeteria uniform. The look of fierce protection in her eyes when she saw him sitting in the principal's office, flanked by 2 officers, was something he would never forget. "My boy doesn't steal," she had declared, her voice unwavering. "There must be some mistake." The security footage they showed them was grainy at best. The figure in the red hoodie kept their head down, making it impossible to see their face clearly. The timestamp showed 3:45 p.m. on that Tuesday, exactly when the boy had been sitting in the library's quiet corner, struggling with his science project about renewable energy. Ms. Parker, the librarian, had even helped him find books about wind turbines, but she was on vacation now, unreachable to confirm his alibi. The convenience store owner, Mr. Chen, had been reluctant to press charges at first. He had known the boy since he was little, always polite, always counting his change carefully when buying his grandmother's favorite peppermint candies. But the local police sergeant insisted that rising petty theft in the area needed to be addressed, and someone had to be made an example of. The boy's grandmother refused to let him be that example. She spent her evenings after work going door to door in their neighborhood, talking to anyone who might have seen something that day. She visited the library multiple times, looking for security footage or sign-in sheets that could prove her grandson's whereabouts. Her determination never wavered, even when some doors closed in her face. The youth center became their sanctuary during this difficult time. The director, a former lawyer who had given up corporate life to help community kids, spent hours reviewing the case details. He noticed inconsistencies that the court-appointed attorney had missed or ignored. The height of the person in the footage seemed to fluctuate between camera angles. The red hoodie, which the police claimed matched the one found in the boy's closet, was actually a different shade and style. Support came from unexpected places. The boy's science teacher, who had always appreciated his curious mind and thoughtful questions, provided documentation of his ongoing project work. The local church group, where the boy helped serve meals to the homeless every Sunday, organized a letter-writing campaign to the judge's office, attesting to his character. But there were also whispers and pointing fingers. Some parents started telling their children not to play with him anymore. The convenience store, once a friendly place where he felt welcome, became a forbidden zone, with employees watching suspiciously whenever he walked past. Each suspicious glance and whispered comment chipped away at his spirit, but his grandmother's unwavering faith kept him going. The night before the court date, his grandmother sat him down at their small kitchen table. The same table where she had helped him with homework countless times, where they had shared meals and dreams and worries. She made his favorite hot chocolate, with extra marshmallows, a rare treat in their budget-conscious household. "Tomorrow," she said, stirring her own cup slowly, "you'll have a chance to speak your truth. Remember what I've always taught you about the power of truth?" The boy nodded, remembering all the times she had caught him in little fibs when he was younger, how she had patiently explained that lies, no matter how small, had a way of growing until they consumed you. That night, as he lay in bed, the boy thought about everything at stake. He thought about his grandmother, who had never missed a parent-teacher conference despite working double shifts. He thought about the younger kids at the youth center who looked up to him. He thought about Mr. Chen, who had always treated him with kindness until this incident changed everything. The truth sat in his chest like a burning coal, demanding to be spoken. 2 words. Just 2 words that could change everything. But would anyone believe him? Would these 2 words be enough to counter the security footage, the police's certainty, the assumptions that had already been made about him? As dawn broke on the morning of the court date, the boy made a decision. He would speak those 2 words, not just for himself, but for his grandmother who had sacrificed so much, for the community that had supported him, and for every other kid who might find themselves in his position someday. The weight of this decision carried him through the morning preparations, the careful knotting of his only tie, a gift from the youth center's career day, the extra polish on his shoes, borrowed from a neighbor, the neat combing of his hair. His grandmother watched him with pride, seeing not just her little boy, but a young man ready to stand up for the truth. The courthouse steps seemed to stretch endlessly upward that morning. Each step the boy climbed felt heavier than the last, but his grandmother's steady presence beside him kept him moving forward. The building itself was intimidating, all stone and stern faces, with its weathered columns reaching toward the sky like ancient giants standing guard. Inside, they found an unexpected crowd had gathered. The youth center kids had made small signs of support, though the court officers quickly had them put away. His science project partner sat with her parents, nervously clutching a folder full of their research notes and timeline documentation. Even his grandmother's regular customers from the hospital cafeteria were there, still wearing their work badges, having rushed over during their break. Mr. Chen, the convenience store owner, sat alone on the opposite side of the courtroom. He looked uncomfortable, repeatedly adjusting his collar and checking his phone. Their eyes met briefly, and the boy was surprised to see something like doubt in the man's expression. This was the same man who had once taught him how to count change quickly during the after-school rush, who had kept an extra stock of his grandmother's favorite peppermint candies just for them. The court-appointed attorney shuffled through his papers, looking more interested than he had in their previous meetings. Word had gotten around about the community's support, and suddenly, the case didn't seem as open and shut as he'd initially thought. He'd even made an effort to review the security footage one more time that morning, noticing details he'd overlooked before. Just before the proceedings began, an unexpected visitor slipped into the courtroom. It was Ms. Parker, the librarian, looking windswept and tired. She had cut her vacation short after receiving multiple messages about the case. She clutched her library records tightly, her presence adding another layer of hope to the already charged atmosphere. The judge entered, and the familiar call of "All rise" echoed through the room. Judge Reynolds had a reputation for being fair but strict, his years on the bench having taught him to look beyond surface appearances. As he settled into his chair, his eyes scanned the crowded courtroom, noting the unusual mix of people who had gathered for what should have been a routine juvenile case. The proceedings began with the prosecution presenting their evidence. The security footage played on a screen, showing the figure in the red hoodie moving through the store's aisles. The prosecutor emphasized the similarity in height and build to the boy, the matching clothing description, the timing of the incident. But in the clear light of the courtroom, with so many eyes watching, the evidence seemed less convincing than it had in the police station. The boy's grandmother sat straight back through it all, her hand occasionally squeezing his shoulder. She had raised him to face challenges head-on, to never let fear of judgment prevent him from doing what was right. Her own mother had taught her the same lessons during the civil rights movement, lessons about dignity and truth that she'd passed down like precious family heirlooms. As the prosecution wrapped up their case, the youth center director passed a note to the court-appointed attorney. Years of working with kids had taught him to notice things adults often missed. The person in the footage moved with a slight limp, something the boy had never had. It was a small detail, but in a case built on circumstantial evidence, every detail mattered. The defense presentation was stronger than anyone had expected. Ms. Parker's library records showed the boy's consistent presence that afternoon, complete with computer login times and book checkout records. His science project partner's documentation provided a detailed timeline of their work. The youth center director testified about the boy's character and his regular attendance at afternoon programs. But it was the unexpected testimony from one of Mr. Chen's own employees that caused the first real stir in the courtroom. The young cashier, who worked part-time while attending community college, remembered seeing the boy in the library that afternoon. She had been there studying during her break, before her evening shift when the theft occurred. Her testimony cast the first serious doubt on the prosecution's timeline. As the evidence unfolded, the boy watched the faces around him. He saw the gradual shift in expressions, from certainty to doubt, from judgment to consideration. He saw Mr. Chen's furrowed brow as he leaned forward to whisper something to the prosecutor. He saw the judge taking careful notes, occasionally glancing at him over his reading glasses. The weight of the past weeks pressed down on him, the suspicious looks at school, the whispers in the neighborhood, the pain in his grandmother's eyes when she thought he wasn't looking. But there was also the strength of community support, the power of truth, and the unwavering love of his grandmother that had carried him to this moment. When finally asked if he had anything to say in his defense, the boy stood slowly. The courtroom fell silent, all eyes turning to him. His grandmother's teachings echoed in his mind: stand straight, speak clear, tell your truth. The two words that had been building inside him, waiting to be spoken, finally had their moment. These two words would not just be his defense, they would be a testament to everything his grandmother had taught him about integrity, everything the community had shown him about support, and everything he had learned about standing up for what's right. As he opened his mouth to speak, he knew that these two words would change more than just his own story, they would challenge the assumptions that had brought them all to this moment. The atmosphere in the courtroom grew thick with anticipation as the boy prepared to speak. Sunlight streamed through the high windows, casting long shadows across the wooden floors. His grandmother had always told him that moments of truth come with signs, and he couldn't help but notice how the sunbeam fell directly on the witness stand, almost like a spotlight from heaven itself. His mind drifted back to 3 days ago, when everything had started to shift. He had been helping at the youth center's afternoon program when a new piece of evidence emerged. One of the younger kids, while drawing with crayons, had casually mentioned seeing someone with a red hoodie running behind the convenience store that day. But it wasn't the boy, it was someone who helped at the auto repair shop down the street. The youth center director had immediately called the court-appointed attorney, who, for the first time, showed real interest in the case. The attorney had spent the next day interviewing people at the auto repair shop, discovering that one of their part-time helpers, who often wore a red hoodie, had suddenly stopped showing up for work the day after the incident. The boy's grandmother had always said that truth has a way of finding its own path to the light. She had taught him this while tending to her small garden behind their house, showing him how plants would bend and grow toward the sun, no matter what obstacles stood in their way. Truth is like that, she'd say, gently touching a climbing bean plant. It'll find its way out, no matter how many walls are put up in front of it. Now, standing in the courtroom, he understood what she meant. The truth had been slowly working its way out, like those bean plants in their garden, growing stronger despite the shadows cast upon it. The security footage, once thought to be definitive evidence, now seemed full of holes. The timestamp that had seemed so damning was called into question when Ms. Parker's library records showed him logging into a computer at almost the exact same time. More revelations had emerged during the proceedings. The convenience store's regular customers had come forward with statements about the boy's character, recounting how he would often help elderly shoppers carry their bags or hold the door open for mothers struggling with strollers. These small acts of kindness, witnessed over years, painted a picture that contradicted the prosecution's portrayal of a troubled youth. Mr. Chen's expression had changed dramatically throughout the morning. The store owner kept looking at his phone, where he had received a text message from his nephew who worked at the auto repair shop. The message contained information about the former helper with the red hoodie, including details about suspicious behavior noticed in the days before the theft. The boy's science teacher had brought his project notebook, showing detailed entries from the day in question. Each page was dated and time-stamped, showing his progress on the renewable energy project. The entries revealed a student passionate about making a difference in his community, not someone planning to commit a crime. His grandmother sat in the front row, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. She wore her best dress, the one she saved for special occasions, pressed carefully the night before. Around her neck hung the small gold cross her mother had given her, the one she said had carried her through her own trials and tribulations. Her faith in her grandson had never wavered, not for a single moment. The case had taken an unexpected turn when the youth center director presented a timeline he had carefully constructed. It showed not just where the boy was that afternoon, but tracked his movements through various witness accounts. The timeline revealed something crucial. It would have been physically impossible for him to be in two places at once, yet that's exactly what the prosecution's case required. The judge, who had been taking careful notes throughout the proceedings, leaned forward slightly. His years on the bench had taught him to read between the lines, to look for the truth in the small details that others might miss. He had noticed how the boy maintained eye contact, how he sat straight and attentive throughout the proceedings, how he showed respect to everyone in the courtroom regardless of their role in his case. As the boy stood to speak, a small ray of sunlight caught the edge of his grandmother's cross, sending a brief flash of light across the courtroom. He remembered all the nights she had sat with him, teaching him about integrity, about standing tall in the face of adversity, about the importance of truth even when it seemed the whole world was against you. The community members in attendance held their breath. The youth center kids, who had been fidgeting throughout the proceedings, suddenly sat still. Ms. Parker, the librarian, gripped her records tightly, her knuckles turning white. Mr. Chen had put his phone away, his full attention now focused on the boy he had known for so many years. Everything his grandmother had taught him about truth and justice, every lesson about standing up for what's right, every example she had set through her own life of dignity and determination, it all came down to this moment. The two words he was about to speak would not just be his defense, they would be a testament to everything she had instilled in him. The courtroom waited, hushed and expectant. The judge's pen hovered over his notepad, ready to record what would come next. The prosecutor had stopped shuffling papers, his attention fully captured by the moment. The court-appointed attorney, who had started this case with indifference but now sat forward with genuine interest, waited alongside everyone else. These two words would do more than just address the charges against him. They would speak to the heart of justice itself, to the importance of looking beyond appearances, to the power of community and truth. As he opened his mouth to speak, he felt the weight of not just his own future, but the futures of others who might find themselves in similar situations, resting on what he was about to say. In that moment of perfect silence, just before the boy spoke, time seemed to slow down. The old courthouse clock ticked loudly, its sound echoing off the wooden panels that lined the walls. Through the high windows, clouds shifted, causing the sunlight to dance across the room like nature itself was holding its breath in anticipation. His grandmother had always told him that the most important moments in life come with a kind of clarity, a sudden understanding that cuts through all confusion. As he stood there, facing Judge Reynolds, he felt that clarity wash over him. Every event that had led to this moment played through his mind with crystal-clear precision. He remembered the exact moment when the police had first questioned him. They had pulled him aside after school, their badges glinting in the afternoon sun. He had been so scared, so confused, that he could barely speak. But now, looking back, he realized that his silence then had been born of shock, not guilt. The truth had been there all along, waiting for the right moment to emerge. The youth center director had spent countless hours gathering evidence, talking to witnesses, and piecing together the events of that day. Just yesterday, he had made a breakthrough that changed everything. Security footage from a bank across the street from the convenience store had captured something crucial, something that would support what the boy was about to say. Mr. Chen had been fidgeting with his phone throughout the morning, but now it lay forgotten in his lap. His eyes were fixed on the boy, and there was something in his expression that hadn't been there before, a mix of doubt and hope. The store owner had known this child since he was small enough to barely reach the counter, had watched him grow into a responsible young man who always counted his change carefully and helped other customers when they dropped things. The court-appointed attorney, who had started this case with such indifference, now sat alert and attentive. The transformation in his demeanor had begun when he received an anonymous tip 3 days ago, a phone call that led him to discover evidence that would support the boy's version of events. That evidence lay in a manila envelope on his desk, ready to be presented if needed. Ms. Parker, the librarian, clutched her records tightly. She had cut short her first vacation in 5 years to be here, driving through the night to make it back in time. The computer logs she brought showed more than just the boy's presence in the library that day. They showed his determination, his focus on learning, his commitment to making something of himself despite the challenges life had thrown his way. The boy's science project partner sat with her parents, her fingers crossed so tightly they had turned white. She remembered working with him that afternoon, how he had been so excited about their renewable energy project, how he had suggested staying late to perfect their presentation. The timeline she had helped create proved he couldn't have been at the store when the theft occurred. His grandmother's small gold cross caught the light again, sending another flash across the courtroom. She had taught him that truth wasn't just about words, it was about actions, about character, about the kind of person you choose to be every single day. The cross had been her mother's, worn during times of great challenge and change, a symbol of endurance and faith passed down through generations. The prosecutor's earlier confidence had visibly wavered. New evidence had emerged that morning, brought forward by an unexpected source. One of the auto shop workers had finally come forward with information about their former colleague, the one who had suddenly disappeared after the incident. This testimony had cast long shadows over what had seemed like a straightforward case. The younger kids from the youth center, who had been asked to put away their handmade support signs, now sat perfectly still, their eyes wide with anticipation. They had spent the last few weeks making cards for the boy, telling him how he had helped them with homework, taught them to play basketball, showed them how to stand up to bullies without using violence. Judge Reynolds leaned forward slightly, his reading glasses perched on the end of his nose. In his many years on the bench, he had learned to read people, to see beyond the surface of things. Something about this case had troubled him from the start, the rush to judgment, the assumptions made, the pieces that didn't quite fit together. The sunlight shifted again, creating a perfect spotlight where the boy stood. His tie, borrowed from the youth center's career day collection, had been knotted carefully that morning by his grandmother's steady hands. His shoes, polished to a mirror shine, reflected the courtroom lights. He stood straight and tall, just as his grandmother had taught him. The two words he was about to speak had been building inside him like a wave, gathering strength from every person who had believed in him, from every piece of evidence that supported his truth, from every lesson his grandmother had taught him about integrity and courage. These words would not just be his defense, they would be a declaration of his character, a testament to his upbringing, and a challenge to the assumptions that had brought him here. As he opened his mouth to speak, the entire courtroom seemed to lean forward as one. The truth, like his grandmother's climbing beans reaching for the sun, was about to break through every barrier placed in its path. What happened next would not just change his life, it would change how an entire community thought about justice, truth, and the power of standing up for what's right. The moment had finally arrived. The boy took a deep breath, and in a voice that started soft but grew stronger with each syllable, he spoke the two words that would change everything: "Watch me." The impact was immediate. A collective gasp rippled through the courtroom. Judge Reynolds, who had seen countless defendants pass through his courtroom, sat up straighter, his eyes fixed intently on the young boy before him. Those two words weren't a plea or an excuse, they were a challenge, an invitation to look closer, to see the truth that had been there all along. The boy continued speaking, his voice growing steadier with each word. "Watch me on the security cameras in the library. Watch me help Mrs. Thompson with her groceries every Wednesday. Watch me tutor the younger kids at the youth center. Watch me work on my science project about making our community better. Just watch me, and you'll see who I really am." His grandmother's hands flew to her mouth, tears streaming down her face. She had taught him to stand tall, to speak his truth, but even she hadn't expected such powerful simplicity from her grandson. The small gold cross at her neck caught the light once more, seeming to glow with an inner fire. Mr. Chen, the convenience store owner, stood up suddenly, his chair scraping against the floor. "Your Honor," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "I need to say something." The judge nodded, and Mr. Chen continued, I've watched this boy grow up. For years, I've watched him count pennies to buy his grandmother's favorite candy. I've watched him hold doors for people, help elderly customers with their bags. Maybe I should have watched more carefully when all this happened. The court-appointed attorney quickly rose to his feet, holding the manila envelope he had been saving. Your Honor, in light of this, I'd like to present new evidence. He proceeded to explain how security footage from the bank across the street showed someone else entering the store at the time of the theft, someone who matched the description of the former auto shop worker who had disappeared. Ms. Parker, the librarian, couldn't contain herself any longer. I watched him too, she called out, earning a stern look from the judge but continuing anyway. Every Tuesday and Thursday after school, 4 hours. He was there that day, working on his project about renewable energy. I watched him research wind turbines until the library closed. The youth center director stood next, holding up a thick folder. Your Honor, we have documentation here, attendance records, tutoring logs, volunteer hours. Every single one shows the same thing, a young man who spends his time helping others, working hard, and trying to make his community better. We've all been watching him, and now we need to really see what we've been looking at. The prosecutor, who had been shuffling through his papers with increasing agitation, finally looked up. Your Honor, in light of this new testimony and the evidence that has emerged, the state would like to request a brief recess to review our position. His voice carried a note of resignation, as if he too was beginning to see what had been in front of him all along. Judge Reynolds removed his reading glasses, polishing them thoughtfully with his handkerchief. When he spoke, his voice was quiet but carried throughout the courtroom. Young man, when you said, "Watch me," you weren't just speaking to me, were you? You were speaking to this entire community. You were asking us all to look past our assumptions and really see. The boy nodded, standing straight and tall. My grandmother always says that the truth shows itself in what we do, not just what we say. She taught me that our actions tell the real story of who we are. So yes, sir, I'm asking everyone to watch me, not just today, but every day. Watch how I live, how I treat others, how I try to make things better. The younger kids from the youth center were practically bouncing in their seats now. One small boy couldn't contain himself and blurted out, "We watch him all the time. He teaches us math and helps us with our homework and shows us how to be good." The courtroom erupted in murmurs and nods of agreement. People began standing up one by one, each with their own story of watching this young boy grow into a responsible young man. The crossing guard mentioned how he helped younger children safely cross the street. A teacher spoke about his perfect attendance and dedication to learning. Even the court security officer mentioned seeing him pick up trash outside the courthouse while waiting for his hearing. Judge Reynolds raised his hand for silence, and the courtroom gradually quieted. He looked at the boy for a long moment, then at the community members who had gathered to support him. In all my years on the bench, he began, his voice carrying a weight of experience, I've never heard 2 words speak so loudly. You've asked us to watch you, young man, and it seems that many already have. They've seen what I'm beginning to see, a young person of character, supported by a community that knows his true nature. The sunlight streaming through the windows had shifted, creating a warm glow throughout the courtroom. The boy's grandmother reached out and took his hand, her grip firm and proud. The truth had finally emerged, not in complicated legal arguments or technical evidence, but in 2 simple words that challenged everyone to look deeper, to see clearer, to judge more carefully. As the judge prepared to make his ruling, the atmosphere in the courtroom crackled with anticipation. Those 2 words, "Watch me," continued to echo in everyone's minds, a simple but powerful testament to the importance of looking beyond surface appearances and quick judgments. They were words that would be remembered in this community for years to come, a reminder that sometimes the simplest truths are the most powerful. Judge Reynolds took several long moments to gather his thoughts, the weight of the moment visible in his expression. The afternoon sun had begun its descent, casting long shadows across the courtroom floor. Everyone waited, barely breathing, for his response to those two powerful words that still hung in the air, "Watch me." "In my 30 years on this bench," the judge began, his voice carrying the wisdom of experience, "I've heard countless testimonies, arguments, and pleas. But rarely have I heard two words carry such truth, such challenge, and such dignity." He removed his reading glasses, placing them carefully on the bench before him. "This case came before us seemingly simple: security footage, a stolen item, a witness identification. But you," he looked directly at the boy, "have shown us that justice requires more than a quick glance. You've asked us to watch, really watch, and in doing so, you've taught this court a valuable lesson." The judge picked up the case file, now thick with new evidence and testimonies. "The security footage from the bank, brought forward by your attorney, clearly shows another individual entering the store at the time in question. The library records and multiple witness accounts place you elsewhere. But more than that, the character testimonies from your community paint a picture of a young man who deserves to be watched, because he's showing us all how to be better." The prosecutor stood up, straightening his tie. "Your Honor, in light of all the evidence presented, particularly the new security footage and witness testimonies, the state moves to dismiss all charges against the defendant." His voice carried a note of humility that hadn't been there before. Mr. Chen stepped forward again, his voice trembling slightly. "Your Honor, if I may?" The judge nodded, and the store owner continued, "I want to withdraw my complaint completely. This boy, this young man, has been coming to my store since he could barely see over the counter. I should have watched more carefully, trusted what I knew about him. I let fear and assumptions cloud my judgment, and for that, I am deeply sorry." The boy's grandmother squeezed his hand tighter, tears flowing freely down her face now. All those nights of prayer, all those hours of working extra shifts to support him, all those lessons about truth and dignity, they had all led to this moment. Judge Reynolds nodded thoughtfully. Motion to dismiss granted. The sound of his gavel echoed through the courtroom, but he wasn't finished. "However, young man, your words today, 'Watch me,' they demand a response from this court and this community. You've asked us to watch you? Well, I intend to do exactly that." The judge leaned forward, his expression softening. "I'm establishing a new youth mentorship program in our courthouse, and I'd like you to be our first junior mentor. You've shown wisdom beyond your years, and other young people could benefit from your example. Would you be willing to help us with that?" The boy looked at his grandmother, who nodded encouragingly, her face beaming with pride. "Yes, Your Honor," he replied clearly. "I would be honored." The youth center director stood up, barely containing his excitement. "Your Honor, we'd be happy to partner with the court on this program. This young man has already been informally mentoring kids at our center, this would just make it official." The courtroom burst into applause, and for once, Judge Reynolds didn't call for order. He let the celebration wash over the room, understanding that this was more than just the end of a case, it was the beginning of something new. Ms. Parker, the librarian, was already making notes about setting up a reading program for the new mentorship initiative. The court-appointed attorney, transformed by the case, offered to volunteer his time to help expand the program. Even the prosecutor nodded his approval, recognizing that sometimes justice works best when it brings people together rather than pulling them apart. Outside the courthouse, the afternoon light had turned golden. News cameras had gathered, having heard about the unusual developments in what was supposed to be a routine juvenile case. But before facing the media, the boy turned to his grandmother. "You taught me that truth always finds its way to the light," he said softly, hugging her tight. "Just like your garden." She cupped his face in her hands, her eyes shining. "And you, my boy, have grown stronger than any plant in that garden. You've not only found your way to the light, you're helping others find their way too." The youth center kids surrounded them, waving their finally permitted support signs and chattering excitedly about the new mentorship program. Mr. Chen approached cautiously, holding a familiar bag from his store. "Your grandmother's favorite peppermints," he said, offering the bag with a humble smile. "And a standing offer for you to help me set up an after-school homework space in the store's back room. Maybe we can be part of the mentorship program too?" The boy accepted both the candy and the offer with grace, demonstrating the very character that had shone through during the trial. The crowd around them grew as community members approached to offer congratulations and support for the new program. Judge Reynolds watched from the courthouse steps, his clerk beside him already drafting the official paperwork for the mentorship initiative. "Watch me," he mused quietly. "Sometimes the youngest among us teach the most profound lessons." Those 2 words had done more than just clear a young man's name, they had sparked a movement in their community. A movement based on really seeing each other, on looking past first impressions and quick judgments, on giving people the chance to show who they truly are through their actions and character.